you just put yourself into the selfless service lifestyle where you just probably wanted to do good.
Well, I tell you, I'm still trying to make an effort. Since January 2021, I was a member of the Army Science Board for 3 years. And when I left the Army Science Board, I realized that we still needed to coach, teach, and mentor our military to understand the changing methods of war. Mm-hmm. And we are transitioning from 20 years of fighting jihadis and fighting in the Middle East. And now we're looking at peer competition. As you can see, the whole world is on fire. So it
really is. And you have a book, right? It's called Next War.
Right. And,
right. And this is something that is this is your lane. And so you bring this to the show to talk about. I was watching some of your highlight reel, right? You have a YouTube video out there right now, Next War. And I was watching your highlight reels of that. And you're talking already like with a crystal ball of what is currently happening right today, even though I don't like to date our podcast, but you've got Israel and Hamas going at it wholeheartedly. You've got Ukraine and Russia battling it out right now. And these are, inadvertently like proxies for a lot of others to be involved in. And then you have Azerbaijan and Armenia, right? These triple threats that have been going on that have been under the radar or not under the radar, or people are just like batting a blind eye to it. And I kind of talked to my oil change guy the other day. Okay. Hear me? And I said, are you ready for a supersonic missile to blow up the grocery store across from us while we're getting this oil change right now?
Yeah.
And he just looked at me.
We're in dangerous times. And since January 2021, when I left the Army Science Board, I started to spend a lot of time briefing and having Zoom and MS Team calls with soldiers, leaders, and government leaders throughout our nation, also our allies. And so I've given over 280 presentations since January 2021. Yeah, and those presentations mostly by MS Teams or Zoom. MS Teams is the preferred method right now, but the point is almost all virtual, but several dozens in person. And I don't charge for these. All I care about is that we learn together and that we try to move our understanding, our situation awareness of the changing methods of war. And in many ways, just move the needle to get us to act in time, because I think that we need to have a sense of urgency. We're running out of time. If we're not careful, we're going to find ourselves in a much greater conflict against peer competitors very soon. If you think about it, World War II wasn't really thought of as World War II until about 1940, 41, maybe even 42 by some people. Mm-hmm. We are right now in a situation where there's the greatest war in Europe since World War II. There's a major conflict in the Middle East, which is going to expand. Israel is going to be fighting both Hamas, Hezbollah, and possibly Iran. We could be in a war this Friday in the Middle East. Our aircraft carriers are in position. Our aircraft could be there, because if we do not act after we've set this deterrent up, then no one will ever believe that we will act, and all of our deterrence fails. And therefore, we just bring on more war. So the first thing we have to do is not so much to try to prognosticate where everything will happen and what will happen next, but understand the changing trends, the changing methods of war, and then be able to apply those with some foresight and imagination. And if you look at what happened in Israel, the horrific Hamas attack on Israel that happened on Saturday, October 7th, and is now, developing into a major war. This is a failure of imagination on the part of U.S. intelligence, Israeli intelligence, and European intelligence, and a failure of imagination amongst the leadership. We get so consumed with our internal squabbles and our internal desires that we forget about the people out there who really want to kill us and how we need to protect them. And the government's job and the leaders of our nation and other nations, their job is to protect their people. And the problem with Israel was that they have done some things that have made that less capable than more. And Israel now is going to show you in their fight against Hamas and others an extraordinary capability, because they understand the changing methods of war. They have adapted to these and developed the systems, the tactics, techniques, and procedures in order to do extraordinary things in the battle space. And we're going to see that unfold in the days ahead.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of things that we didn't know are going to be in battle will, like, even from video games, if you will be starting to show up on our news feeds when you see these things that we've never seen before being deployed. You know, these new munitions that we never knew about. Something that's been classified this whole time is now being used in a big conflict that we're like, what was that thing?
Yeah, and
What
the
just went
Israelis
off
have actually been practicing with these weapons. So the difference is that if you have a secret weapon, if you will, unless it is able to deploy by itself and use by itself, if humans have to use it, if units of soldiers have to use it, they have to practice with it ahead of time. There's many cases in history where countries had military technology that was very advanced, tried to show it up right before the battle, but nobody knew how to use it. But the Israelis are an exception here. They have integrated this into their training, integrated into their system. I mean, just imagine, the Israelis have mobilized 360,000 soldiers in 3 days.
Right, because they have a ready reserve, right, of like IDF and male, female from 17 or 16 all the way have to do their forced service for 2 years. But then we see photos, right? We see photos of the IDF walking around with their guns slung in civilian clothing, like eating gelato. Okay, so it's like, you know, they're supposed to be always at the ready for this type of a situation. I guess that would bring me to say we all saw what happened or hear about what's happening, and it's ever evolving. But why do you think it took, 6 hours for them to give any kind of reaction force to the initial onslaught with all of these armed personnel on the ground? I'm sure. Yeah,
they're going to do a detailed after-action review of what their problems were. Yeah. But I tell everyone there, but for the grace of God, go us. I mean, the Israelis are very good at what they do at defending their nation. And their military is extremely serious, much more serious sometimes than ours. And our problem is that they were surprised. And how were they surprised? Well, again, it's a failure of imagination. When you believe a certain line of thinking that, well, Hamas is coming around, they've been real nice to us lately, we beat them hard in the May 2021 war.
2021, yep, that's right.
They learned their lesson, so they would never dare do anything. When you start to believe that narrative, then you disregard the obvious indicators that start to pop up, and you come up with excuses for why they won't happen. So
where do the dominoes lie where we have, let's say, Palestine? I know they're not rocks per se, but I usually say they throw slingshots at Israel, to try to attack them back in the day, kids throwing rocks, and then Israel having armament against Gaza and that influence. But today, and Hamas throwing rockets, right? So where do they go from not having much in some of these, volleys that they get involved with, all of a sudden thousands and thousands of these missiles? And I understand paragliders are using they're being inventive and they're being outside the box thinkers, but where are all these rockets and all of these, where do you think the dominoes are being pushed off here? Well, it's quite clear, and we need leaders with foresight. Foresight is the ability to see and solve problems in the short run and create solutions for the long term. So we have to be able to solve problems in the short run and create solutions for the long term. And our lack of leadership across the board is sad, because this is what causes us to drive into cascading failures, cascading wars. I mean, have you noticed that the wars now are happening with increasing frequency, and they're not small things, they're major wars. So our challenge is that our leadership really needs to change. And we need there's got to be human intelligence that was on the ground. There's got to be human out there that's right. But if you ignore it because you've been told, no, that's not really what they mean. They really are getting together because they're just trying to posture. You can talk yourself out of bad things all the time. Now, failure of imagination is crucial. This was a complete failure of imagination. The Israelis are very good at this. They normally developed up multiple courses of action with many possibilities. They red team it with folks that are trained to act like the enemy and think like the enemy and say, this is what the enemy will do. Somehow they ignored all of that. This is the same danger that we have. Now, you can use red teaming in any organization you have, but for national
purposes and for the Army, it's truly important. For the military, it's truly important. We've got to look at some of the worst cases. Now, you put this into context of the United States. What can we learn from the surprise that Hamas gave Israel? Now, the rockets and all that you mentioned, just to answer your question, Hamas and Hezbollah are proxy armies of Iran, pure and simple. Anybody who says otherwise is making an excuse. Now, they're making an excuse because they don't want to get into a larger conflict. But you see, there's two kinds of ways to look at most of these problems. There's the black swan. We all know what that means. It's kind of like what happened on 9/11, when something out of the blue seems to shoot out. And then there's the gray rhino. And the gray rhino is something that you see off in the distance is coming towards you, but you ignore it. And you ignore it until it hits you. And our problem is we have some gray rhinos out there that are huge and some black swans, and you couple those and you've got real problems. The Israelis disregarded the intel, the indicators, didn't believe that Hamas would act, and did not alert their folks. And their folks were not prepared. Their soldiers in camps, their police in stations were not prepared for this kind of attack. Now, they should have been thinking about this, because I'll tell you, in 1948, when Israel first got its independence, and Israelis were living in kibbutzim and nakal settlements and all this, they were armed and they were prepared, and they were better prepared for this kind of attack in 1948 than they are today. Why? Well, we've gotten a lot softer over the years. We don't carry weapons anymore. At least in Israel, they're not even allowed to carry weapons in many cases. Most people don't know that. They don't have a Second Amendment. An armed population is more difficult for this kind of thing to happen against. A disarmed population, it's much easier. So Israel has changed, and they rely on their military to do stuff. And their common thought is that hold in place and hide, and the military will come save us. It's kind of the same thing that many people in the United States believe in the police. Bad things won't happen. If anything happens, I'll call 911 and the police will arrive. Well, mostly the police arrived after the fact, and the army in Israel arrived after the fact. Now, that is hurting the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, to the core. They are sickened by this whole thing, and they are going to seek their revenge on Hamas and then later other enemies, should those other enemies continue to attack. And today there's been a lot of action in the Lebanon-Israeli border with Hezbollah. So actions that could erupt into greater conflict. So we could see this easily get into a larger war. But what's important isn't the ability to kind of to be some kind of prognosticator that says, I know exactly what's going to happen. No one knows what's going to happen tomorrow. But what we can do is we can study the past, and we can learn to gain foresight. And one of the things I've been trying to impel the U.S. military to do is to study the wars of the last 3 years. Now, there are 4 of them now. There were 3 up until Saturday. The first was the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War in 2020, 44-day decisive victory of Azerbaijan against Armenia. And this was the first war in history to be won primarily by robotic systems. No kidding.
Right, like a drone or some type of other.
It was the first time that unmanned combat aerial vehicles and loitering munitions were used on such a scale for such a great effect to win decisively, when you consider the Armenians held the high ground, not hills, mountains. They had defensive positions that were dug in for 26 years. And all of that didn't matter. The Azerbaijanis were able to change the situation. Studying that war gives you great insight and provides you with the fuel for foresight to see where the rest of the wars are going to happen and how they're going to happen. Then there was go ahead. Your
YouTube video, it's Next War, right? That you have out there. That's what it is. That was about 4 weeks ago that you put that up. And then, I was watching it. It was just really informative. And I just want to let my listener know that that's out there, right? We're going to put it in the comments so that if you want to just click on that YouTube link, we'll get that information. I just want to let you know that, it's incredible to watch the footage that you have there, where it shows just these, makeshift, they would be like a VBIED. Right.
Exactly right.
Like just completely correct, a vehicle-borne improvised explosive device.
Right. And the changing methods of war are such that soon we will have AI-enabled swarms of loitering munitions linked with every other system that can be linked and networked, and they will go from point A to point B to point C, and they will kill and destroy all of the things underneath there according to their targeting parameters. So what we're going to get is an increased tempo of war. Anyway, I've developed what from this study of war, of these three wars, and again, the Nagorno-Karabakh war was the first one. The second one was the Israeli-Hamas war of 2021, which the Israelis won in 11 days. Now, Hamas was badly beaten in that war. They sued for peace and sued for a ceasefire, and the Israelis granted it to them because it wasn't anything like what happened this last Saturday. There's going to be no ceasefire now. And then the third war, of course, is the Russo-Ukrainian war, the greatest war in Europe since World War II, the most bloody and the most innovative. In fact, if you were to say, how do you represent in one word the Ukrainian armed forces? And that word would be innovation.